Hands up if you were at the carnival last night. I know that was a question we asked earlier. I may or may not have hired the masked percussionist to come parade through here, so that might change the energy. Be on the lookout for that. So hands together if you today or yesterday met somebody new, made a connection, created some way to further your business. Is that possible? Yes. So with that, let's appreciate National Cannabis Industry Association for this fantastic event, to the team there that's working behind the scenes to make that all happen. One of the things that Aaron said yesterday that I really rung true for me was we're not just in here to build our businesses and further our businesses, but really building community. And when I heard that yesterday, I heard that of really building community amongst us, entrepreneurs that are creating new possibilities in the cannabis industry. And then listening to Ian this morning, it's really about building community in the world as well. Some appreciation for our new board of director, Ian, for the work he's doing with Denver Relief. So I'm thrilled to bring together this panel to moderate the panel that's been brought together today. So let me introduce you to them. First is Chad Tribble, and in 2009, Chad got his red card for arthritis. It worked wonderfully. Soon after, he started growing as a caregiver. Infused edibles were just getting going in Colorado, and it really sparked his interest. And he thought he really wanted to infuse hard candy, so just started doing the research and development for that. He made an alcohol extraction, and after testing the oil, they found out it was really high in CBD. And with a little more research, they found out which strains were high in CBD and continued to grow those specifically. And the first tested CBD edible was really born, and that's Mountain High Sucker. So we'll hear from Chad. Additionally, Julie is here. Both of these folks live in Denver. President and co-creator of Julie and Kate Baked Goods, and she began creating edibles that are as natural as cannabis in 2009. The company's specific expertise is in clarified butter extraction and recently added infused coconut oil to growing product line. So keeping the canna butter and canna coconut oil strain specific has allowed the company to explore benefits found uniquely with each type of plant. The product line now consists of healthy, refined, sugar-free, gluten-free edibles such as fresh granola, roasted seed mix to fill the need for patients with compromised digestive systems, as well as tailoring products for low anxiety and high libido. So although research and development is where she has a true passion, Julie spends a lot of her time working with groups here in the state of Colorado with the CBA, Colorado Business Alliance, helping to define new regulations, encourage safe use for public, while at the same time really helping it be practical for the manufacturing side. So you'll hear a lot about that today. She's also a founding member of the national organization called Women Grow. Happy wife of 21 years and 3 teenagers whom are all experts on the subject of cannabis. And then finally, we've got Kyle Marshall visiting us from California of Morsel Bakery, a manufacturer of medical cannabis with edibles, over 5 years of vending experience. Based out of the Bay Area, Kyle has produced such popular edible brands as Organic Goodies, Morsel Bakery Cookies, Hearts of Hemp Granola Bar, and Black Mamba High Potency Brownies. He's provided consultation for winning dispensary applications in Napa, as well as other edible manufacturers. Morsel Bakery began as a small, home-based venture in 2011 and has grown to a collective of 8 kitchen volunteers with over 35 dispensary clients in the immediate Bay Area. Morsel Bakery is also a sustainable member of NCIA. And I'm Maureen McNamara. My company is Cannabis Trainers, and 2 of our top programs are food safety training for edible makers and responsible vending training, Sell Smart, for sellers. So I'm honored that you're here, and as you know how this works, each of these folks will speak, and please feel free to write down questions as we're moving throughout the next 20 or 30 minutes, and then we'll take all those questions at the end. So please help me welcome Chad Tribble.
Thank you, Maureen. Everybody, my name is Chad Tribble. I'm one of the owners of Mountain High Suckers here in Colorado, and we service quite a few of the dispensaries throughout the beautiful state of Colorado. We're the first edible company to fortify our edibles with the cannabinoid that is now being sought after dynamically with CBD. Today I'll be talking about extractions, the types of extractions that are being produced today, concentrates, and the usages for them, testing with them, and of course the last part would be on company ethics. Extractions are basically to remove all the excellent cannabinoids from the cannabis that you are working with and essential oils. And there are quite a few varieties of techniques and instruments for these. The basic one that is probably the safest period is when you can infuse butter or an oil with cannabis. That is the safest technique that is out there, very low in cost and as far as a startup opportunity, and they worked wonderful in baked goods. And each one is going to have a different edible that it would be infused better with. Then you'll have an alcohol extraction, which is another opportunity to get great cannabinoids out as well as be able to offer a whole plant medicine. Butane is another very popular opportunity for people to get an instrument that allows you to pass that gas through and extract. And CO2. CO2 is very similar to the butane instrument, but using, of course, a different gas. So with each of these types, there's different characteristics, not necessarily the butter. As we said, that's a safe one. It doesn't have a volatile output of a gas. But each one is going to require a different type of safety operation. Alcohol, again, has a flammable fume. So you need to find out with compliance in Colorado how to remove these fumes and how to keep it safe with returned air. As you remove air, you have clean air, and everything in Colorado is getting into a closed loop system, which means you are encapsulating the gas or the liquid like alcohol and keeping it in a safe environment for employees or owners that are running these extraction runs. Knowing the characteristics is key, and for Colorado, we get the benefit of having compliance-related mandated issues that keep you in a safe position. For instance, butane for years has been open blasted with a can and a tube, and unfortunately there's been explosions, and that's not something you want to have an employee or even someone doing, so that's been made illegal in Colorado, and we're glad to see that because closed loop is helping keep employees safe. CO2, again, it's a closed loop system and usually has been, and those are instruments that have been around for quite a while from other pharma companies. So knowing the characteristics is key. Keeping compliant in Colorado is key, and they go hand in hand. There's quite a few usages for the extractions, for the concentrates that are produced. For edibles, certain edibles are going to benefit from butter. Certain edibles will benefit from an oil. And to have that R&D involved with the product before you just say, oh, I'm going to make it with this and release it. You need to know if it has shelf stability. Will your gummy bear be a gummy bear 2 weeks later, or is it going to be a flat piece of a gummy bear? So research and development is key to know what extraction to use for what product. And that's actually a fun part of a company to go through that. Obviously, topicals are wonderful for direct pain management. So creams and ointments are another product that can be infused with a concentrate. Patches have become popular, but there's not a lot of companies doing it, but they're even in a more direct position to offer a certain cannabinoid per patch. For instance, just a THC patch, or a ratio of a 1-to-1 with THC to CBD, and they are very, very effective. Vapor pens are a very popular item for concentrates, as you'll see very branded companies out there now with strain-specific blends, strain-specific or blends of cartridges that you can put into these vapor pens. And of course, the big rage for some younger people are dabbing, where they'll take a concentrate and use a bong-type thing called a rig to consume the oil. Testing, obviously, is something that took its time in Colorado. Our company's been testing for almost 5 years. We wanted to know how strong our product was, so the consumer did not have to get an edible, have the bud tender say, here's your big brownie, just eat a corner of it. That has always led to either the worst nightmare for people because it didn't work for a half an hour and they ate the rest, or it tasted good and I continued eating it. So I think testing is going to be key to really dial in how many milligrams per unit you're getting, and boy, are we mandated to do this now. For what it's worth, we are not mandated to test the medical side yet, but the rec side, or the adult usage side, will have all 4 tests mandated by this fall, which would be pesticide, herbicide, residual solvents, molds, and potency. And also with potency comes cannabinoid profile. Again, key to do whether you're in Colorado or not. You would want to know how potent you're offering your products to be, because first of all, cost. Is your profit margin going to be correct? If you offer a 100 milligram and you're actually putting in 2, you need to know, and you want it to be safe for human consumption for people. Let's see. With the tests in Colorado, there will be a fail opportunity for people. In the fall, you will be mandated out of those tests. For flowered items, dried cannabis, if you fail on one of those, that batch will be destroyed. There's no way to clean it up. Residual solvents are the other side of it. So concentrates made from extractions, they have one opportunity to have that product be clean to the healthy standard, whatever it would be, and that could be actually get a green light. So you might have an opportunity to clean it up. So it really does depend on what concentrate you're going to choose to do for what line of product, and testing is key even if you're not in Colorado. So I would highly recommend, if your state's not on the page of testing, that you would be leading the group by testing and show that you have integrity with your company. Going into part of integrity is company ethics. How does a company show that it's a real player in offering something safe for human consumption, a safe environment for employees? Well, having operating procedures for your employees, having handbooks for your employees, really to have a guideline for them to walk through. Whether the boss is there or not, or the manager's not there, you should know protocol for what facility operations you're trying to acquire. So if a manager and an owner are cutting corners, that's what happens to employees. So cleanliness, all the health food standards need to be implemented, and that's going to keep you feeling wonderful about your company, to offer a great product to people, and again, have it in the market, a healthier cannabis product for people. And that's kind of what we're here to do, is to offer something that is natural, kind of like Julie's statement about being as natural as cannabis, and that's the way it should be. So thank you guys so much.
Chad, one of the things I appreciate is before regulation required, before testing was required, you did that, and that invitation to everybody to really step up and lead the way in that. Thank you. Next up is Julie with Julie and Kate's Baked Goods, making things natural as cannabis. So let's welcome her up.
Thank you, Meg. Just a side note, we love that Meg is helping with the Serve Save classes to keep us all under regulations, which is required here in the state of Colorado. So, as they introduced me, I am Julie, co-creator of Julie and Kate Baked Goods here in Denver. Started this company in 2009 for a personal need. I have celiac disease and suffer from stomach issues, and cannabis was very helpful with that. and my partner, co-creator, Kate, brain tumor survivor, and suffered nerve damage. And again, this was a wonderful product for her. So that being said, we created this company first just for fun, just to help us personally. And then once we realized that the extraction method that we had chosen, our canna butter, was super helpful, we wanted to get the word out. We wanted to produce it, and we made it so that we could do that. So today, briefly, what I'm going to talk about are creating responsible products and what that really means for any of you that are considering doing this or doing it right now in other states. First, there's two sets of rules that you pretty much have to go by. The first and the easy ones are what the state and the city are regulating and mandating. In the state of Colorado, for instance, right now, the recreational line, now keep in mind there are several differences between the medical market and our recreational market, and that's for our job to keep them separate and understand both of the rules intimately, which we do. But we do also know that the regulations that are coming down, that are about to be finished actually this week, will also follow along the lines of medical. So the medical market is eventually going to follow the same regulations. We don't know when though. But so basically the state of Colorado, in brief, we have a 10 milligram cap serving size. So that means that every product we produce should be easily divisible into 10 milligram servings. Now, what my company did was we individually wrapped them in 10 milligram servings, and some of them were not because they weren't required, but we're moving in that direction. And it just makes it easy for the consumer. They don't have to think about it. That's one serving. Although, as I'll show you in a few minutes, it's technically a high serving, 10 milligrams, especially for somebody who's never had cannabis ingested before. So, you know, the 10 milligram serving, capping at 100 milligrams. However, that's really challenging to do a 100 milligram product because lab testing, if it shows 100.001, technically you're over 100 milligrams and they would have a right to reject that product. So in my case, we just decided to cap ours at 50 milligrams. We're not even going to try to get close to the 100 milligrams. And then we have to have a list of ingredients, you have to have a list of warnings, whether statements, whether the package is childproof or not, your grow information, where did the trim come? All of this has to go on the package now. It's mandated by the state. Whether or not it was tested. I'm very proud to put CanLab's logo on every one of my products because we have been testing with CanLabs since they began. Thank you so much, Heather, who's here, our wonderful chemist. Without Heather, literally, I wouldn't be up here today. There's no way that my product could be what it is without the lab side by side working with me every day. And way back in the beginning when it was just as simple as a potency, that helped us with formulations. And now we're way beyond that. I can tell you emphatically when microbials start to grow in my granola. We know that just by lab testing, you know, one at 4 months, one at 6 months, one at 8 months, one at a year, and that's when we finally saw microbials. So, you know, now when I put on my package that it expires in 6 months, I'm not guessing anymore. Anecdotally, we know emphatically with scientific evidence that it does expire technically at a year, but just to be safe, I said 6 months. Because it's cannabis and we want people to use it a little bit quicker than that. And then, of course, we have a universal symbol that's required. It's, I don't know if there's anybody from the state here, but I'm going to say it, it's kind of ugly. But we are required to have it on our package, so there it is. And basically that says that it's, you know, been manufactured in the state of Colorado. And then, of course, we have to have our licensing and manufacturing information. So that's a lot to put on your package already. That has nothing to do with my product, really. That's just state regulations that go on it. So kind of going along with what Chad was telling you, now you got to pick your product, and I made mine a little bigger so that I could have more room to put the verbiage that I find necessary on there. So those are the second set of rules that you really have to follow. First, again, the city and state, and now let's move to the fun one, which is actually your personal mission for your company. So in my case, again, natural as cannabis, you know, everything's as natural as cannabis. It goes along with who I am. That's the way I eat. I'm organic. I don't eat refined sugars. I don't try and avoid foods with pesticides. I definitely don't eat GMOs. So my product was tailored to go along with all of that. It's something that I understood. I wasn't going into some foreign entity that for me would be a gluten-containing brownie, would actually have been more challenging for me to create. That's not something I bake on a regular basis. So then, tailoring it now, we knew that it had to what kind of food I wanted, but now all of a sudden I'm a mother, and I have to take that into consideration, how I could not be appealing to children at all. And so again, I went with these natural looking products that are earth tones. They're not, bright pink colors. It's just, you all know what granola looks like. It's a very earth tone color. Kids aren't naturally drawn to that. The colors that I used on the exterior of the package, again, are not bright and pretty per se that a child would be appealing to or even looking at. So, and then of course I mentioned that it's gluten-free, refined sugar-free, and all of that stuff. I wanted to be proactive as far as the regulations go. So what that meant is I had to get involved. And so I'm pleased that I know many of our city councilmen. They know my name, and they know what I do, and they know why I do it. And I really, really, if I get no other message out to you today, please get to know your city council people, get to know the all of a sudden I lost it. Thank you, the Marijuana Enforcement Division. I try and put that out of my head. But, so they know me. Louis Kowski, the director of the MED, knows me well. I work with Meg Collins, who's sitting here, part of the CBA, the Cannabis Business Alliance. We have a work group now. It's called the Cannabis, our edible, what do we call it? The Edible Council, thank you. And our Edible Council consists of over 12 manufacturers in the state of Colorado. We work together on these regulations. So for instance, a new bill comes in, Senator McNulty and Senator Singer feel that they have to mandate new rules because people might get sick and a child might find it. So they draft this bill that is not acceptable to a manufacturer. So instead of just sitting back and complaining about it, I sit with these people on the work groups and we try to make the regulation fit for everybody. And I really feel like in this new bill that's going to finish being passed next week and buttoned up, we feel comfortable as a manufacturer that now we can live with that regulation. So I can't tell you enough how important it is to just get to know those people as far as your regulations, who's making them. You should definitely know that, and you should be there talking to them at all times because you're going to be the ones implementing it. And last, about my company personally, I am tailoring my products to adults that are cannabis connoisseurs. And so that being said, I kept my butter brews and my coconut oil brews strain specific. And as Meg led into a little bit, some of our favorite ailments that we're working on, low anxiety is one of my favorite to specialize in, and of course, high libido. We're working on that one, which is going to be really fun. We can't, of course, put that on the package yet, but with lab testing, and we've had lots of anecdotal testing on that, and that's super fun, to find a strain that is repeatedly giving people these experiences. For instance, the low anxiety. We have many patients that have given up their Xanax or given up whatever other anxiety medication they're on, and instead now they consume my granola, whichever strain they have picked, whichever one works best for them on that low anxiety. So keeping strain specific is a little challenging, especially if you don't have your own grow, but it's definitely possible, and I would I'm a supporter of that. For the connoisseur, if nothing else, for yourself, just to know, then you have information, okay, I produce this bubble gum on a major scale, and I know anecdotally what bubble gum should do for the people that consume it. Of course, everybody's different, but in theory, it's a high CBD. It should react this way with most people that are using it. Finally, I didn't bring it up here, but working together, I just wanted to show you all when we work as an alliance, what our manufacturers have done. Thank you. we are beginning to educate the state of Colorado on edibles, and we're very proud to do it together as an organization. None of these people are my competitors anymore. Every one of them has something to offer, and I'm happy to say they're all friends of mine now. So what we did in our Cannabis Alliance group, we developed this, and you can't see it, but please come up and get brochures or get copies of it. We have committed to 250,000 of these that our group alone is paying for. And what this is an edible education. It'll be located at every dispensary that sells recreational products. It basically sends the message to go slow and start low. And we do say on the bottom that a frequent consumer can handle 10 to 15 milligrams. But if you're a new consumer, you're looking at 1 to 5 milligrams, which is a lot different than the medical market, where we frequently offer somebody a 50 milligram dose. These are different consumers. They've never had it, and so we want people to have an enjoyable experience. And I would hope that people come up, please take these. They're going to be available online at CBA, and we're really proud of what we can do together. So last message, please work together with your fellow manufacturers. They're not your competition. Trust me, they are your buddies. They're in it with you. Thank you so much.
One of the things that stands out is that I know you're super busy. Each of us are, and that you take the time not only to make a whole natural product, but you're in there networking and having connections with the MED and your local folk, and we really invite you to do that as well. Julie will be here later to share the anecdotal evidence of the frisky-inducing product, so feel free to tug on her sleeve for that. Please help me welcome Kyle Marshall, Morsel Bakery.
Hello, my name is Kyle Marshall. I am a California transplant from the Bay Area here in Colorado. Colorado has been interesting. It's like night and day between California and Colorado. The last two speakers here, Chad and Julie, talk a lot about regulation, which is such a blessing here in Colorado that we have such firm and standard rules and regulations. Unfortunately, in California, the story is quite the opposite. There's quite literally no regulation in terms of edibles, and very little on the storefront side of the operations of medical cannabis. So in California, we face a lot of different challenges, differently than a lot of people challenge in Colorado. For instance, it's illegal to transport product, and there's no regulation on how much product you could have at a time. So there's always a challenge in working in that gray area in California. But I want to talk a lot about product design and designing your product for the upcoming and recreational market. A lot has changed over the past 5 years. When I began making edibles in California, the standard was a Rice Krispie treat in a Ziploc bag with a sticker of information on the front. A lot of that has changed. For instance, we have Bang here as one of our big sponsors, and they probably were the first to pioneer packaging and standardizing it to look like a product that could be sold at Walgreens or Whole Foods. So now the goal is to redesign our packaging and approach the market anticipating to be sold at markets such as Whole Foods and retailers of those sorts that are currently established. As Julie was mentioning, potency and dosage is the top priority in marketing a product. The difference of tolerance between a cannabis user and a new-time user is drastic. The products that we produce in California, because our market is mostly experienced users and users seeking a high-potency product, that's primarily what we're putting out is high-potency products in order to garner that market. Everyone in California is looking for what can medicate me the most. Even though we don't have a recreational market, that's what most of the market is seeking is high potency. A bang for your buck, essentially. But quite the opposite on the recreational side of things. Everybody's looking for something that's not going to quite put them in the spin zone. When we produce our high-potency edibles, we have 4 cookies in a box. Some of my bakers will actually, as new time consumers, many of them don't smoke, but they'll eat about 1/8 of one of those cookies, and they'll be spun out, throwing up, looking as if they've drank a whole bottle of tequila. It's pretty shocking, and it's not the desired effect on that person. So it's really important to understand the responsibility as an edible producer for the recreational market, to know that it's important not to scare those people for the first time, and to have a product that is what we like to call titrated, so that it's easy to take a small amount at a time. So, for instance, if you do produce a product, it's important to produce it so that it's molded, it's easy to dose out. For instance, our cookies are 4 in a box. You can either take 1 or half of a cookie or the whole, depending on your experience as a consumer. It's also important to understand, of course, the appeal to children in Colorado. That's the main point that's really been driven in a lot of these meetings. And the packaging has changed to accommodate that. In California, we have no regulation on the appeal to children, so we have to take it upon ourselves in California to mimic the regulations that are happening in Colorado. But there are some places in California, if any of you are interested in entering the market in California, that have regulation, such as San Francisco, who has put forth their own regulation locally. So a lot of producers had to change for San Francisco, and a dispensary such as Harborside, I believe they're the only ones in California requiring a commercial kitchen and insurance and so forth. So you really have a lot of challenges in California trying to meet the local as well as the state regulations, being that the state are a little more liberal than the local regulations. But really in the future, I think we're going to see a lot more healthful products. Right now, as I mentioned before, the industry has really began and thrived, and what we actually continue to thrive on is just simple cookies and brownies. And now we're going to be seeing, hopefully, pressed pill forms that include other herbal mixtures that complement the effects of cannabis, as well as products such as that Julie is making that are more healthful-minded. So in the future, I believe that we'll be seeing a market that's oriented towards the healthfulness of cannabis and its medicinal components, rather than just the recreational side of trying to get as medicated as possible. But for any of you entering the market and designing a product to enter in, it's always important to understand first impression and the design of your product. Basically having shelf appeal. When a consumer enters recreational store or a medicinal store in California, they're going to be looking for what's right in front of them, appealing to them the most. So it's always important to have packaging that balances the appeal to consumers while not appealing to children. So there's always a challenge to strike that balance in designing your product. And in best practices, as many of you enter the market to try to sell edibles, persistence is key. There's a lot of competition, a lot of people entering the market, and so there may be 2 to 3 different producers that produce an edible nearly identical to yours. But what's important is to keep persistent, always do follow-up calls. Sometimes you have to do that daily just because of the management chain of whatever dispensary you're trying to get into. So never give up on your first try. Always continue to try, because it took us 5 to 10 to 20 different times to get some of our clients. And it's also important to communicate the growth and essentially the background of what you're receiving as far as raw material that goes into your product. Julie does strain-specific edibles, which is fantastic. A lot of connoisseurs are looking to have the effect of OG Kush in their granola, or have the effect of Purple Kush in their edible. And that allows, those patients to experiment and find what's best for them. In my personal experience, I haven't seen too much of a difference in terms of medical efficacy between using indica and sativa and having those medicinal components come out on the other side. Usually the difference between those comes from the terpenoids that are within those flowers that you smell and consume when smoking it. But through the infusion process, a lot of those delicate terpenoids are typically either destroyed, or the difference in the end product isn't as drastic as many might consider. So, what we do in order to maintain consistency of our product is to essentially source from multiple different growers and to combine it into a uniform starting material, and that will allow your product to have the same potency, the same effect, and so forth. And the infusion process that we use, there's many different options for infusing your edibles. We have using keef. For instance, I believe some edible producers will decarboxylate their keef and add it directly into water. This is kind of a short-end way to have a drink product because the keef can be shaken and dispersed within the water and consumed that way. There's also glycerin. Glycerin is actually a weak uptaker of THC. It is possible to use glycerin, but it's discouraged just because it doesn't attach as well as other substrates. And there's alcohol, of course. Chad was mentioning his edibles or oil is produced from alcohol, which is a very safe and effective way to extract the terpenoids from the starting material. And also tinctures. Tinctures fall under edibles as well. Sublingual edibles will definitely be a large component of the future, because sublingual, when you use alcohol, suspended THC and alcohol, the effect is going to be much, much quicker than would be having the edible going through the metabolic process of consuming it through your stomach. So a lot of patients who are looking for a product that's going to act quickly are going to be turned towards tinctures. So I do see tinctures as being an important part of the market in the future, especially tinctures that are going to integrate different different other herbs to complement those medical effects. But the way we make butter is the traditional old school method of heating your butter with the trim and pressing it through a wine press, and that's the way we've made butter for the past 5 or 6 years, and that's another efficient method to infuse the butter directly with the plant material. But what's really important in the research and development process of making your edible is to do sort of a lab tune-up, and what that means is to test your starting material, test what you start with. Test what comes out of your starting material, whether you infuse it into alcohol or butter, test that, but also test the end result of that infusion process. For instance, if I were to cook the raw trim with the butter, I would test the trim before I cooked it. After I pressed the butter, I would take the dry trim that's been pressed and test that and see how much THC is left over in the infusion process. And then test the end butter or the end alcohol and see how much THC is in that. So through that lab tune-up process, you'll be able to check the efficacy of your infusion process and compare it to other products that you're developing. And really, I'm glad we're all here today because, edibles are truly the future of the market. People entering, new to the market to consume recreational cannabis, smoking isn't exactly appealing, especially to people who don't smoke cigarettes or are not familiar or have not smoked before. So it's our responsibility as edible producers to ensure that the product that we make is going to make a positive first impression on that new market. But I'm glad to be here in Colorado. It's great to see such a regulated state that has so many rigid guidelines to produce a quality product at the end. Just the way that the regulations are written here, all the T's are crossed and the I's dotted, and there's definitely a bright future for Colorado with regulation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate how, even though regulations don't require it, you do such frequent testing throughout the series of your baking products from the beginning to the end. So we've got questions. Feel free to keep them coming. And let's see here. Also, just before you leave, if you desire, Julie has provided these CBA-produced, team-produced events. So please grab those flyers about Start Low, Go Slow, and some edible education for our consumers, which actually leads me to my first question. As wholesalers, you have to rely on bud tenders and cannabis consultants to really sell your products safely and to instruct and teach consumers how to safely consume. How do you ensure that occurs?
I'll go for that one. Is this mic on? Hello? So the question basically is, how do we inform the consumer? Okay. And that's kind of what I was talking about, the second piece, the company, your set of rules, your mission. We at Julie and Kate Baked Goods have put specific dosing information about what to expect as far as you consume it. You need to wait an hour. You need to eat it with a healthy fat, and why you need to eat it with a healthy fat. We actually put on, the package, it says that THC is facilitated through fat and it helps the digestive process. This is additional information that should go on everybody's package. So say it however you want, but basically you need to put some dosing information. We talk about time from old school. I'm a deadhead way back when, and you talked about timing your peaks. And so kind of that's where we put that into our label. Because there is essentially a peak, several euphoric peaks during the times while you consume an edible. And so we put information about that on there, that, expect your first one within the second hour. And by the fourth hour, you'll pretty much culminated that euphoric peak period. And then you should be feeling just a nice residual effects, whatever you're going for. But definitely, you need to do a little anecdotal research and put it on your label.
Good. Thanks, Julie.
Well, and the last note is bud tender training.
That's right.
Yeah, so for a company to be able to, you get a new account, you would love to meet with the bud tenders and the owners, go over what your product is trying to offer. And again, you have to be careful on the label to make claims, so people normally don't make claims on labels, but the bud tenders are a key component in trying to educate the consumers. So it's great to have that kind of relationship with a facility.
Thanks.
And one more thing with that, Meg. Sorry, we are working, the Cannabis Business Alliance, we're working on a new education that the entire industry will have to go through, have some kind of certification program. Part of that education piece will be on dosing and how to instruct your consumers. Remember, it's different for two different markets here. We have a medical market that can handle these crazy big doses and need possibly those large doses, and then you have the new consumers. And so it's almost like two different conversations that you have with people.
And that bud tender training is important because you rely on them to make sure that they are instructing the public on how to safely consume. And one of the questions that just came up was, have we noticed a change in edible consumption or purchasing based on the Maureen Dowd article?
Who wants to point?
Sure, we have seen a change. Obviously, there's a lot of information in the news that's whether pro or con for cannabis consumption. And so there's a very sensitive issue with children getting it, obviously. But the consumers, from either experience or a friend telling them about, hey, it might say to eat half of this, but why don't you try less of that? So it is this slow and low that a lot of people are really trying to, put into people's heads. You can always take more, but you cannot reverse the effects of cannabis when it's ingested. You might have a 5-6 hour really bad trip, if you will. We wouldn't say it's an overdose, but it's definitely over ingesting, and it's not a fun thing. So slow and low is key.
Yeah, and the desire is to have people have a good experience.
One more thing to add about Maureen Dowd is that she was on a tour before she had eaten her edible, and during this tour she was advised many times to go slow and start low, and she chose as an adult consumer to ignore all of those instructions, and then we all know what happened to her. And so just, we're assuming that people read the package. They don't always. We're assuming that they listen to these education little bits that they're getting, and they're not. So we're doing the best we can, but that's kind of where the regulations are steering us, so that if you choose to ignore all your, everything that it's written and everything that they just told you, well, then we're still going to make it really challenging for you to have that experience, because you're going to have to individually open up all of these pieces to do that, to overindulge now.
I don't know Maureen Dowd personally, but I'd imagine she's a very stressed out and rigid person. And I think it's always important to remember that mindset is always important entering into consuming cannabis beforehand. So relax.
Relax. And I think you've inspired a few people to get into the business. So there's a few questions about how much would it cost to really jump into the infused product business? Are we talking $20K, $100K, $10 million?
Well, I was just talking with Chad here, about commercial kitchen production, probably $50,000 to $100,000, depending on, the details of what kind of real estate you're working with and developing it, for commercial kitchen regulations. So really, that's probably going to be your biggest expense in the beginning, is buying the equipment and modifying the space for production.
And at least in Colorado, it has I would say, a fair license fee opportunity, where some other states that are coming online are having a non-refundable even entry to get to license, $50K just to apply, and it's not refundable if you don't get it. That's kind of getting sour for a business start in our minds, because Colorado looks at the candidate that's applying. If you don't really have an excellent credential opportunity or can't disclose the right information, you don't get it. So I think Colorado's got a very fair market for the license fees, at least. And so, yeah, easily, $200K to start would give you some protection and padding for employees and rent and things, but depends on what kind of model you're starting with, small or large. So just know what kind of bite you're trying to take.
And always forecast your, source of material and ensure that you have enough material to, meet your projections. It's always critical.
And just so you know, we will be taking questions to the top of the hour with our late start, so we've got more time. Don't go anywhere. Would you purchase cannabis from a wholesaler? And if yes, what would be your criteria for doing that?
You two both have your grows, right? Do you have a
grow?
Oh, you don't have a grow either? Chad has a grow. That makes it a lot easier if you can just have your own grow. Then you, first of all, have total knowledge of what you're putting into your products. I do not have that luxury yet. We are working on that, but we purchase wholesale direct from, I've been able to choose and come into contracts with certain specific growers around the state. It's challenging because a lot of the grows want to use their trim for just concentrates, which we mentioned earlier. Dabbing is very popular, and that's what a majority of the trim is used for nowadays. So to get it from a grow and just to be able to use it for butter is a little challenging, but I'd say establish relationships immediately with people that are growing and work out some kind of trim trade agreement, if you will. That's also a lot of fun. For us, we private labeled for several dispensaries, and then in turn we had contracts with their grow. Now, I was very picky. I chose grows that were definitely organic, and now we can lab test to prove it, and so that was part of my criteria. And so I would definitely, it's essentially just a wholesale trade agreement, and the price does fluctuate. Definitely, it depends on the trim that's coming out or the demand.
It's always, as with any business, it's always, an advantage to vertically integrate yourself and have your own grow and your own supply and to have control over that. But, you know, with the demand of edibles, it's always, you know, in order to subsidize that, you know, you have to work with other growers. And, you know, ultimately it puts you in a good position though, once you have those relationships, you know, to have more material to grow your business with. And, you know, there are a few things that you could use with people that are utilizing their material for other products, such as bubble hash, you know, or butane is, you know, one thing with bubble hash is you could actually take the washed plant material and immediately freeze it afterwards, and that could be then used in the traditional butter infusion process because there's actually leftover medicinal material after it's been hashed, so to speak.
Julie, this is a question for you on some of the processes you use. What process do you use for your butter extraction? Producing a product, when is the time to add oil or butter? And then some follow-up questions like what is your batch size for your butter in numbers or weight, shelf life for infused product? I think you covered that. And plus you don't use any additives or preservatives.
No.
So what about your butter process?
So the butter process is very organic. Kate and I used to say we're two bitches brewing, and that's really what it is. It's you take the trim, which is the raw material, and it's ground out. And without divulging too many secrets, trade secrets here, it's basically decarboxylized, which any of you who are new to this have to learn what that means on every level, what decarbox means, which is essentially we're activating the THC or the other cannabinoids in there. And then I use clarified butter, and that's probably different than what Kyle uses. I'm not sure. I chose that because there's no milk solids involved, and now we have a longer shelf life. Still has the butter flavor. So essentially you put the trim in with the butter and it's brewed for 24 hours and then strained, and then we have that lab tested. Every batch we have lab tested. Now in the beginning we really loved boutique batches, Kate and I called it, and we would do 2 ounces at a time, you know, just to kind of see for fun, well, what did that strain do? And like Kyle mentioned, it wasn't just the strain itself, whether it was an indica or sativa, there's terpenes, there's flavonoids involved in this that are causing for different anecdotal results. So we were doing boutique batches mostly for our research and development stages. Now that we're in full production, we're now usually around 4 pounds of trim at a time is processed per batch. Again, everything's lab tested. And then once the butter is tested, now I can use it for baking, and it's a simple process. I mean, whatever you're going to manufacture, in my case, I'm doing baked goods essentially. Granola is really a baked product, and you toss it in with the oats, and you know, make sure that you have a nice homogeneous mixture, still done by hand. There's really no machine that can toss like the hands can. So in my kitchen, we still are very hands-on. It's a very labor-intensive process. And then it's just baked like granola normally is, or my roasted seed mix has been tossed with the can of butter and then laid out on sheet pans and baked and cooled at certain processes. Now I have a candy that has a different process because it's more of it's made with maple syrup, because again, I don't use refined sugar. So maple syrup, just, you know, we had to adjust humidity temperatures in the kitchen actually mattered. So I think, does that pretty much answer it?
Yeah.
Oh, right, thank you.
I was just more concerned is when you're in the baking process, because I bake.
So is it,
Do you add your butter in a traditional recipe kind of thing, or do you, because it's got the cannabis in it, do you put it in before?
no,
When you mix your wet and dry together,
It
or
just-
does it come after?
So the question's about timing of adding it.
yeah, absolutely. Now, I think your question's twofold. First is whenever you would add the butter into your recipe, that's when you add it. But because my can of butter is a certain concentrated amount, and I've pre-measured, I have a formula of how much can of butter I need in this batch, because it's the 100 milligram granola, so every unit has to be 100 milligrams. So now I know how much can of butter to add. It's still not enough butter. I will add my extra can of butter or clarified butter at that time, or coconut oil, depends on the recipe. And it's still at the same time that you would normally add it. So like in a brownie, you would add it to the wet ingredients and mix it up, and now bake it. We do monitor temperature different. There's a difference. At this point, my butter has been activated, so I no longer want any real heat involved on it. So you bake at a much lower temperature.
So a couple questions about compliance. What are EPA, OSHA, FDA requirements for bakery or infused foods?
There's none. FDA does not touch our products right now, and OSHA won't, they have never contacted us. Who we are, that's where your mission comes in, and that's where who you are comes into play. A clean kitchen, a serve-safe, certified kitchen, all your staff, that's just kind of, you know, I take that back. The city of Denver does have requirements as far as your health, the kitchen in general. But as far as FDA concerned with our products, they've absolutely walked away.
And what I appreciate, and Chad will speak to this in a moment too, is that you three are demonstrating, and I think the invitation is for each of you that are in or about to enter, if there aren't regulations, find the strictest one out there and play by that. With the food safety requirements or whatever that may be, testing requirements. If you aren't sure, do it once or twice.
Now, just to be clear, Meg, you cannot test our products with the normal laboratory. So an FDA certified laboratory, we don't have that luxury. But we can test now with Can Labs or many other laboratories in the state to tell us that information, especially about like botulism and other microbials that might be growing. You know, that's new to the industry as of like literally the last 5-6 months. And so now we can say it doesn't do that, it doesn't have it. But again, your mission is to provide a safe product, so you do these things, you learn what the FDA would have required in a granola or a brownie or a candy, and you do that. You just be ahead of the curve.
The only thing that will be coming down the pipeline for extraction instruments would be that they are going to have an OSHA requirement for the safety of that actual instrument to make sure it's been actually engineered the right way. So there will be actual people that will come and certify the instrument that you're ready to use. Even if you're getting an instrument from a high-tech pharma company type thing, they'll probably still have a guy walk through just to confirm, but that will be something, and it's in regards to obviously safety for people.
And of course, I'm a big fan of get your team trained so you're doing it well and right. And to add on to what Julie just said is that I spoke to Heather from Can Labs, and pleasingly, in addition to being able to testing the potency, they'll also be able to test water activity and pH levels, which are great to know, and modify if possible to reduce bacterial growth. So that's fantastic. Final question, and I know there are more out there that we did not get to, so please know we are accessible for you today, so feel free to chat with us. What are the key likely changes to be recommended by the MED, Marijuana Enforcement Division, or Edible Task Force Division this fall?
There's two sides. There's the recreational and there's the medical. So they're both going to have a little different type of regulation. Obviously, the big one, as Julie was talking about, is really for recreational milligrams. They're going to keep it into a 10 milligram serving. At least it could be less.
And then, of course, we have the child-proof packaging requirement.
Yep.
Now, that's optional on the manufacturer level. We do not have to put our package in an opaque package or a child-proof package, but then that would require the dispensary to have an exit package, which is child-proof and very cumbersome. And I'm not personally, as somebody organic who loves this environment, I'm not happy with the packaging requirements that we have to do. They're heavy plastics, and there's a lot of heavy plastics. And these opaque packages are mylar, and they're not recyclable, and they have a very high price on the environment, in my opinion. But that being said, it's required, so we do it. And we do it. In my case, I have an option for a dispensary. They can get my product in child-proof packaging, or they can have it for less expensive in the opaque pouches.
Well, in a conference of brilliant people, I imagine what would be possible to create a new package that fits regulations that is friendly to the world.
Earth-friendly. Well, there are packaging companies that keep calling us and telling us that they have these new great things that made out of corn or whatever, and so stay tuned on that.
Thank you so much. There's something I heard yesterday from Troy Dayton. He said it's not just that we can legally buy cannabis, that it's really an invitation to buy a taste of freedom, and certainly that applies for our edible makers, buying that taste of freedom. And thank you for what you are doing and what for each of you attending here desire and endeavor to create a professional, responsible, and certainly delicious industry. So thank you.